Welcome to another great week on the Ari Goldkind Show on Sirius XM, Canada Talks Channel 167. We have a huge guest for you tonight. Frank Figliuzzi is the former assistant director of the FBI. If you watch MSNBC or NBC News, Frank is their security national correspondent. All things FBI, all things Trump. Again, if you watch MSNBC or NBC, Frank is their correspondent. He'll be with us for the full hour tonight. After my opening monologue, we will talk all things Trump, the raid, the affidavit, what it all means, what's classified, does Trump have the codes? Frank and I have a really interesting back and forth discussion on some things that I don't agree with him on. We'll get into a little bit of January 6th. We'll get into threats against the FBI, which he doesn't like. Which I agree with him on, but there seemed to be an awful lot of quiet post-George Floyd about all the threats on police officers. Frank Figliuzzi and I have an incredible discussion. You won't want to go anywhere. It is a lot longer than his usual 3 or 4 minute hit on MSNBC. He and I will have a real discussion, and I think you'll enjoy it. Let's get to my opening statement of the week, and I'm going to give you all a bit of a sneak preview to next week's show. You may have heard that there is a virulent, vicious, garbage-filled anti-Semite walking around Canada or perhaps Lebanon named Laith Marouf, who hates Jews with every fiber of his being, pretends it's only about Jewish white supremacy or Israel. And you may have seen the news come out this week where he got $200,000, just under, of your taxpayer money to teach broadcasters how to be anti-racist. Think that through. This man, who through his politics or a mixture of his politics and religion, literally thinks Jews should be pretty much wiped off the map. That's what he won't say out loud. So he just calls Jews a bunch of different names and pretends it's about Israel. He's the man that you saw, the Minister of Diversity. Think that through. The Minister of Diversity in this country, Ahmed Hussein, come out and say we're canceling his $200K funding and clutching his pearls. Oh, we didn't know about it. We didn't know about it, even though we know that he actually did know about it. I believe he's fully lying. And $200,000 of your money, taxpayer money, was given to this grifter who's one of the most virulent anti-Semites, whether he's a Canadian citizen and lives here or lives in Lebanon. This is the way that Canada is going. The victimizers pretend they're victims. The oppressors pretend that they're the oppressed. The discriminators pretend that they're the ones discriminated against. And if you don't know the name Laith Marouf, we're going to have the journalist who broke this story that's now all over the news with the apology and these tweets and thoughts are vile and reprehensible and we're cutting his funding. The person who broke that news is Jonathan Kay. And Jonathan Kay will be our guest for the full hour next week. And we're going to get into this affair because I can assure you, this is not a bug of the Trudeau government or our body politic or the political discourse. This is a feature. It is open season on two groups in this society, in Canada, in this diverse mosaic. And the two groups that you can say anything you want about are Jews and are about Christians who happen to be Caucasian. If you say anything about any other group, that is completely forbidden. You will get canned for it. And John and I will have a really interesting conversation about the piece of garbage, Laith Marouf, who has been what I call a racial grifter for at least 20 years of his life, and a person who hates Jews more you probably could not find in Canada. So I just say that to you to make sure you tune in next week, because John Kay and I will have an incredible discussion that you don't want to miss. Let's continue with my opening statement of the week. It is high time in Canada that we get to a point, whether it's Canada or south of the border, where we stop assigning virtue to people who do nothing but endlessly virtue signal. whether it's the prime minister, or if he says up, you know that the truth is down, or the people, as I said just a moment ago, the anti-racists, who you know are the most racist people to their core. Isn't it always interesting that the people who claim they're on the side of anti-racism are always the most racist and anti-Semitic to their core? Isn't that just always a funny coincidence? And if you don't think it's about an old adage that I always maintain in my business, follow the money, these anti-racism grifters are getting wealthy, not just making an okay or decent living, but they're getting wealthy on this scam, this racial grifting. We live in a world now where those who claim racism are literally the most racist. Those that scream for diversity are the least tolerant of diversity. You may have noticed this in your own life. The people who shout that diversity is our strength and try and convince you that that's the case are the ones that permit the least diversity that goes against their core interests. And by diversity, not just the kind of people that are given free rein to live full, liberal, democratic lives here and to have a seat at the table, but the people that claim diversity is our strength are the ones that are actually engineering racism to keep a growing minority in Canada. Google for yourself the percentage of white people in Canada and what is happening to that percentage, whether it's still going to be a majority, as if this is 1975, or if it is a declining majority moving into a minority. Census Canada, Stats Canada will tell you that. But leaving aside the melanin in your skin or your genetic makeup, which is one of the most disgusting and horrible ways to judge people or to award people this or that, it's absolutely disgusting. These people who claim they're all for diversity will tell you that they support a diversity of thought or of critical thinking. Think through the gaslighting of that stupidity, of that insanity. The very people who say that universities are bastions of critical thinking are the very ones closing down and shutting down discussions that involve any critical thought. Think through all the things you're being told today to believe up is down is up. What you're being told about genders, sexes, racism, systemic racism, the police, truth, civility, crime. There is no critical thinking allowed anymore, or if there is, you're only allowed to think critically in your head, but they'll come for you, the thought police. You know they'll come for you. They'll even seize your bank account if you dare make a donation based on what you think in your head. You don't have to say anything out loud, but make a donation to a cause that the government doesn't like. That's the thought police. But disagreement to these diversity grifters, disagreement is death. If you disagree with them, you're not just wrong. You're not just misguided. You're not just bereft or missing a few facts. You are dangerous. You are right-wing. You are racist. You are every word ending in IST. That is not critical thinking. That is an ad hominem attack. That is not a diversity of thinking or views. That is the censorship of any view contrary to the oppressor or the victimizer who pretends they're the oppressed. They are obsessed with being oppressed, but they're also the victimizer. And it is high time in this country that a rising tide, that the silent majority not be as silent as it has been for so long. I appreciate that's very difficult for most people who don't want to lose their jobs, their reputation. They don't want to be disliked on Twitter. But the Laith Marouf story that we will get into next week with John Kay is just such a perfect example of the Liberal government and the way so many MPs in that party, in my view, border the most racist, the most anti-Semitic, the least diverse thoughts of probably any government in the world. But because you can only be open season on one or two groups, they get away with it. let's move off something of that nature and get to a little bit of news of the week. One of the more disgusting things I've seen in the last week is the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris presidency canceling a significant amount, $10,000 of student debt for those who are making under $125,000 a year. Think through what that really is. Think through to a coal miner in West Virginia, or somebody who plies a trade or works in an Amazon warehouse, just how much $125,000 a year is to somebody who makes $22,000 or $28,000 or $35,000 a year. You're now going to have people who ran up debt with their liberal arts, their ridiculous degrees that now are totally different than when I went to school and you were actually taught critical thinking, where you were actually taught to debate. You were actually taught to challenge power. You were actually taught to not trust Lord Fauci or Lord Trudeau or Lord Biden or Lord Trump or Lord DeSantis, that you question everything. I have different views of all those people. I'm not lumping them together, trust me. But now those people that went off and got those educations are going to have $10,000 of their debt forgiven or canceled, which is complete horse manure. It's not canceled. The buck is passed. And who is the buck passed to? It is passed to the very people who made decisions or who had life circumstances preventing them from going to the universities, that these liberal arts degree people are now having their debt forgiven or canceled because they make under $125,000 a year. What a slap in the face to ordinary, average Americans, many in flyover country, but many also in cities. What an insult to the many Black and Latino people who couldn't afford to go to university. But so many people who did and lead extraordinarily meaningless lives, not contributing to anything because they've been indoctrinated in these far left universities, they're now getting a $10,000 payout by the Biden government. That's what it is, to get some of their votes in advance of the November midterm. That's what it is. It's pernicious, and it is absolutely disgusting that these people are having $10,000 wiped off the books, which will be paid for by all Americans of a lower income bracket. It is no different than somebody making 125 grand who bought a condo or co-op in New York, having $10,000 of their mortgage passed out and the rest of the country paying for it. It is elitist. It is a false response, which is them going to the universities, make the world better. No. It may have been true 20 or 30 years ago where universities were very different entities, but it is absolutely false now. And it's also an insult to the millions of Americans who ply a trade honorably and don't enter into the Twitter disgusting world of identity politics. It's shameful and it should be called out. I want to talk briefly about the Finnish prime minister. You know who that is. That's the young Finnish prime minister, a very, very compelling young woman who was elected. And she's now in trouble for dancing in a private home with her friends and drinking, caught surreptitiously on video that was leaked. This kind of garbage story is why people who aren't robots don't run for office, because they dance, they have sex with partners, they go to rodeos, they go to concerts, they drink, they party, they have the normal fun that you and I are allowed to have who don't run for office. This little mini scandal of the Finnish prime minister, because she's dancing in a private home, and the mouth breathers on Twitter say that it's undignified that she would be doing such a thing. It's such a shameful, stupid point of view. And when that spreads and metastasizes, it keeps good people out there in Canada or throughout the world. It keeps good people from running for office because you're told that's a skeleton in your closet, which is anything other than. It shows that you've lived a full life, and a politician who's lived a full life is much more interesting to me than a politician who hasn't. Back in 2 minutes with Frank Figliuzzi. We're going to get all roads down to President Trump, the raid on Mar-A-Lago, January 6th, and does he have the nuclear codes? Back in 2. Welcome back to the Ari Goldkind Show on Sirius XM, Canada Talks, channel 167. Frank Figliuzzi is a guest I had on 2 years ago, just at the end of Trump madness. And here we are back again, right in the throes of Agent Orange. And Frank, who's the former national director of the FBI, he's got many titles. I'm probably going to get them wrong. Correspondent for NBC News, writer of what's the name of the book, Frank?
It's The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence. And you've given me some kind of promotion retroactively. I was the assistant director of the FBI. But national director sounds really cool.
Well, it's all good, and it's probably better than Christopher Wray these days, but I know you'll disagree with me, and we'll get into that. So I think viewers are very familiar with you for your work for NBC and MSNBC in particular, so it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, I'm pleased to do it. I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad we could do it again.
Yeah, me too. So let's get right into it. At the time of you and I talking, Trump has brought a motion that to people who aren't in the weeds like you and people like me who are criminal lawyers, the term special master probably has some weird connotation of something that we won't get into. So with no further ado, why don't you explain to our audience throughout Canada, but listened to throughout the world on Sirius XM, what this motion is about in whatever way you'd like to explain it.
Yep. I mean, I've read through it today. It was filed, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe this morning or midday. I've had a chance to read through it this afternoon. And look, special master sounds fancy, but it's a third party to more objectively look at whatever it is that the plaintiff or the movant, as they're called, wants them to look at. And the movant here is Donald Trump, and he's saying, look, I'm really uncomfortable not only with what you seized from me being looked at, and I'll get to why he says he's uncomfortable in a minute, but I'm also uncomfortable with who's looking at it, which namely is the US Department of Justice, which, no surprise, Mr. Trump seems to have a real problem with. And he claims, understandably, that they have a problem with him. And he's saying as to why I don't want you looking at this. In fact, he says today, you should stop right now, cease and desist, looking at my stuff. No! He says, look, you've got some stuff that's executive privilege. Now, this is interesting because we've learned over the last year or so that executive privilege doesn't attach to the former president. It actually attaches to the guy or gal in the Oval Office. And in this case, it's Joe Biden who gets to decide what's privileged for the executive and what's not.
So just before you continue that, Frank, just for our audience, because I always like people to know what the it is. What is executive privilege as simply as you can define it? Most people know, but it's such a bandied about term. And explain how that's different from attorney-client privilege, which in this situation, so many people would be claiming there's that issue, which I don't see him hanging to. So just explain in a nutshell, then please continue, what executive privilege actually means.
Yeah, it attaches to the office, the office holder at the time who's sitting in the Oval Office and is the president. And it attaches to discussions, official, not about what crimes he wants to commit or how he wants to commit them or what he's going to have for, rather official duty discussions, conversations, consultations, work product with him, his staff, his official staff, and those who fall under that privilege. And that person at that time will get to claim it. Trump has kind of put things on their head by starting to claim it after he left, retroactively. In fact, Joe Biden, in the investigation related to January 6th, has said, hey, I'm waiving any executive privilege that attached to anything coming out of this Oval Office. Like nope. You can have anything that happened in the White House.
Is that the way to sort of say, I have clean hands, you don't? That's the term in my business?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It sends a and it makes Trump, of course, look bad to retroactively claim something that most lawyers say really probably at best is untested in our system and at worst just simply doesn't exist. You asked about the distinction between executive and attorney-client privilege. Attorney-client privilege attaches to the client who gets to say, hey, I was talking about that stuff with my lawyer, and you can't have that.
And is he making any such claims in this motion or in this enterprise that he was doing with Rudy or any of his various odd and interesting grab bag of lawyers?
With the real caveat that I've only read through this motion once, and something like 27 pages. All I've seen was a claim of executive privilege, not attorney-client privilege. But
All right,
he does say there you've got documents that, this is interesting, you've got documents, not necessarily that are privileged, but that I discussed with people, associated with my presidency. So it's really kind of convoluted. It's not that so much that the documents you have are privileged, but rather I had conversations with people that are privileged about the documents you have. So it's really, really kind of a stretch here. The special master thing, look, I could live with a special master, I will point out. And again, what that is a so-called neutral third party who would be appointed by a federal judge, likely a federal judge sitting in Florida where the search occurred, who would say, okay, I'm picking this person over here. It's usually somebody with a law background, of course. And I'm going to have them look at this material, and they'll decide what's privileged, what's not, what's relevant, what's not, and give you back the stuff. But it can be challenged. Whatever their decision is, they could be challenged by DOJ or by the Trump team.
And that's something that's common in my business of, if there's a raid on a lawyer's office, you'll remember this with Michael Cohen. I know you'll remember this. There was that real issue, and then you sort of silo different things out, and it all doesn't go into the hopper without somebody making sure it's not. That's why I was curious why this man who goes through lawyers the way you change your underwear is not invoking that much more almost sacrosanct notion of attorney-client privilege. So let me ask you this. We've gone into the weeds. Let's now go a little bit broader for a moment, because one of the things I want to talk about with you in the course of our discussion is some of the talking points that are on your network versus Fox versus CNN. But to get there, I think we have to have a foundation. What, in your view, whether you call it a raid, a lawful execution of a search warrant, which I think most people don't really understand that, a raid is different than the lawful execution of a search warrant. And again, I don't often talk about the fact that I'm a trial lawyer in Canada, but, I can't sometimes avoid saying, hold on a moment, this wasn't like a no-knock raid in the middle of the night, and we won't get into Roger Stone. That being said, in your view, as somebody who is in the intelligentsia, we'll get to that a little bit later, somebody who is living and breathing this as part of your career, what is this all about if you were sitting with a group of high schoolers who don't watch Fox or MSNBC and simply want to know, what is this about? Why is it important? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so I would say this really is about the rule of law and our system of government. And that's not to over dramatize, but we have a president who's had a history in office of disregarding the rule of law and eroding our institutions that embody our values as a democracy. So he leaves office, and that problem doesn't go away because he takes with him classified documents, some reportedly classified at the highest level of the US government, top secret and compartmented information. What are those things, I would say to the young students? What are those types of things? I would say they would contain the most sensitive sources, methods, and collection techniques of the US government. Literally, someone's life could be in jeopardy because they're a source secretly for the US government. He may have those kinds of documents. He might have, as reported by some major newspapers, he might even have nuclear related.
All right, so let me push back on that a bit. And I know I watch a lot of your clips. I'm a voracious consumer of things. And, on certain networks, there's no pushback. On your network, there's not a ton of pushback. On the network, on the other side, there's not a lot of pushback. Now, I think you're a guy that's probably throughout your career, you've been used to pushback. I'm imagining that to defend your position, you welcome devil's advocacy. I find that missing. So I want to push back on a couple things, because so often when I see these discussions, it's just talking point, talking point, talking point, and that's why there's such a polarization. If what you're saying is correct, and I know absolutely nothing about whether you are or not, and I'm not a person who thinks I'm some guy sitting in Toronto, Canada, making a living. If what you're saying is accurate, nuclear codes, somebody's life hanging in the balance, the Bourne Identity, the gray man, depending on Netflix and your enjoyment of that. Why did it take so long for this to go in? Because every time I watch this issue on one of the three top networks, that simple question seems to not get asked, and you get back rule of law, rule of law. And if we're going to talk rule of law, I can't figure out how Hunter Biden gets to ride around on Air Force One as if he's you or me leading a law-abiding life. There's got to be a goose and a gander. I'll digress on that. But how does it
you and I'll point out, you and I don't get to ride around on.
Well, I have a feeling you're a lot closer to potentially riding on that vehicle than I will ever be in my life, and I'll take that to the bank. That being said,
let me say this.
Yeah.
Valid questions. You know, you say, well, if you started by saying if what you're saying is true, well, the part that,
or let's assume it's true.
No, but yeah, well, but it's true to the extent that FBI, when they say, and just when the return on the search warrant says, we've got 11 sets of classified documents or 27 boxes, we've got TS, SCI. Yeah, I don't think that's made up. You will go to another network and you'll hear that they don't believe that. So, but let's start with the premise that, yeah, they seized correctly based on probable cause in an affidavit that was signed off on, a warrant was signed off on by a federal magistrate establishing probable cause for the existence of possibly 3 federal statutes cited in the warrant. And lo and behold, proof in the pudding, they come back with top secret. What you're saying is, if that's all true, and if it's really that important, top secret, maybe even nuclear or singular source information, or
to use your example, the security, the life of somebody, and I always like the word compromat, which they used against him a number of years. If what you're saying is true, and again, I just ask questions, that's what I do for a living. Why did it take so long? If Agent Orange, I never call him Trump, I call him Mr. Orange, I call him whatever, doesn't matter.
Right.
Why did it take so long? In your view, give, and let me just finish the question here, because you'll appreciate this. In Canada, we call it an information to obtain, the thing that gets you the warrant. It's not hard to write one of those. What, in your view, took so long, unless the answer is, well, it's the former president of the United States, so that requires a whole different enterprise?
Right. Good questions. Good questions. We don't know the answers to that. But here's, we can engage based on facts in front of us.
Yeah.
We could fairly intelligently, I say fairly intelligently, do some conjecture here, right? Engage in some conjecture. Here's what we got in front of us. There's a history, and it's actually laid out pretty well in the motion today by Trump. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, he's honest in the chronology of events, right? And the reporting's accurate as well. This started a long time ago, as you point out. They started with talks, discussions. Then came a visit to, and that's all laid out in today's motion. Came a visit by high-ranking DOJ people to Mar-A-Lago.
That's in June, right? That's in June, I think.
Maybe even earlier than that.
Okay, fair enough.
But boxes are moved out of Mar-A-Lago, as many as 15 boxes, and yet on a visit, physical visit, they see a storage room and they become very concerned and they go check it out. And they look at things and they take some things and they leave some things, but there's not a resolution here. Trump claims in the motion today, I was very cooperative. I was always cooperative. I told them, take whatever you want. Tell me what you need. So what do I draw from that to fast forward? Something happened, and we know in June, there was a second subpoena. First, there was a subpoena because a lot of people on a certain network are saying, oh my God, the government jumped straight to a search warrant. Why'd they do that? No, they did not. No, they did not. There was a subpoena for the documents. And clearly it didn't really work because they've got more documents when they executed the final search warrant. There was a second subpoena, not for documents, but for CCTV coverage, security camera coverage of the hallway leading to the storage room at Mar-A-Lago. Reports have said, media reports have said, something alarmed the DOJ when they saw that surveillance video. Now, I'm going to guess that it was probably not a cat or a dog that went into the storage room. That, by the way, Trump had been told to double lock after the physical visit by DOJ officials. They said, "Hey, you need to double lock." Now, I have a question. Anticipating your question, why would DOJ officials, perhaps seeing sensitive or classified information, why wouldn't they grab it and take it with them? Why would they say, "Double lock that, please"? So while we figure this out.
And to your point about anticipating and to trust that man.
Yeah, right. And then once you get this surveillance video, you go, "Oh my God, we've got to go. We got to start thinking about a warrant." That is conjecture on my part, but we do know that the surveillance video from reports alarmed people at DOJ. So clearly, I also have to tell you, I think there's a human source or two in this picture. I think you don't list on the face of a warrant espionage, retention, unlawful retention, and obstruction or falsifying or destroying documents. You don't list those three charges unless you have probable cause to believe somebody's destroying something, falsifying something, transmitting something, or clearly refusing to give up what they know they have. So that's where I'm at.
All right. When we come back with Frank Figliuzzi, the former assistant director of the FBI, here on the Ari Goldkind Show on Sirius XM Canada Talks channel 167. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Ari Goldkind Show. We're joined by somebody you will know depending on what channel in the dial you watch on a nightly or daily basis. Frank Figliuzzi is the former assistant director of the FBI, NBC News national security correspondent. I'm probably getting that title somewhat incorrect, but it's still a very, very impressive title that I think you should be very proud of. Back to where we were, because I want to get into some broader things. At the end of this, as somebody who had to make a living blue skying things out, all right, because we've covered a bit of the weeds. We saw a little bit about, people saying it's Jared or it's Ivanka or it's Melania or, it's almost like the Knives Out movie where it's not when you and I were younger. Clue, it was like the professor and Marianne. I think that's Gilligan's Island, but you get my point. When you blue sky this out, when you take any partisan hat off, when it's not you versus Tucker versus Colbert versus the people on your network, what do you think this is? Where do you think it leads? 1 year from now, if we're talking about this, where have you gamed this out if you're a person playing chess?
Okay, so at first, so if you had asked me this, a couple of weeks ago, I might have had a different answer. So the counterintelligence guy in me, 25 years in the FBI, eventually leading counterintelligence for the FBI. The first priority is getting those top secret documents back. First priority. I don't care, criminal charges, we can discuss that later. I need those documents back. They're not yours, they're the US government's. We got to get those back. Why do I think that there's more to it than getting the documents back? I want to say something first. That's enough for me. A year and a half after talks and subpoenas and visits didn't work, didn't completely get the documents back. That's enough for me for the search warrant. But I want to say something more important. I think that all of the trouble that this caused and the ill will this has caused and the pressure it's put on the FBI, an agency I feel very strongly about, means to me that there's got to be more than that, Ari. There's got to be more than just getting the documents back, although, again, that's a worthy cause. Why do I think there's more going on here? Because when the DOJ filed a motion opposing the unsealing of the affidavit written by the FBI agent to support the warrant,
yep,
what did DOJ say? Hey, we don't want to unseal this. because, among other things, we're in the middle of an ongoing, quote, ongoing criminal investigation, unquote. So they didn't say, hey, we're in the middle of doing a damage assessment. We don't know if we got everything back yet. No, they said we're in the middle of an ongoing criminal investigation. And the three statutes they cited as having probable cause for, again, were espionage, destruction or obstruction, and unlawful retention. So there's more to it.
All right, so let's take that for a moment. Let's now go to the other side of the aisle, because again, my views are you underestimate people at your own peril. You probably learned that in your career for many a year. President Trump, who I'll call Trump out of respect, because I usually say Mr. Orange, President Trump has proven for 6 to 7 years that he's often one step ahead of his very formidable adversaries. And anybody who underestimates him, he has probably lasted a lot longer than many of them, okay? If this is about documents, and he stubbornly has stuff in the basement where he keeps his Costco jars of pickles and Big Mac sauce, what is in it for him to not return them? Because I'll just end the question with, people always assume he's a buffoon. I've never thought that. I've never liked the word populist because I think it insults the true meaning of that word. He appeals to a great many number of people. We probably don't have time to get into that. But what is in his mind, if you had to, again, step into uncomfortable shoes as to why, if he knows they want this back, he's not returning them, he's being stubborn, he's probably got enough counsel to say, you know, sir, you're running the risk of that one causeway into Palm Beach being blocked by 50 FBI cars one night. Can you take me through that kind of thinking about him if you assume he's not a buffoon? Which may be hard for you.
Yeah, I don't think he's a buffoon. I don't think he's stable, but I don't think he's a buffoon.
Okay.
And so, you know, we could talk for hours and still not get inside Trump's head and figure it out. People have tried for years. It could be nothing more, as many have said, as he really took a liking to a certain satellite photo. Don't forget, this is a guy who infamously tweeted a top secret satellite image of Iran continuing its nuclear program at a facility.
Right.
Okay,
I remember
this is a guy who, in the Oval Office, decided to hand over to the Russians top secret or secret shared with us by an ally. Okay, so I don't know, but there have been other networks have surmised, and this may be where Trump is going. If it's not just, hey, this is my favorite photo of a hurricane headed for Alabama, or it's a love letter to Kim Jong-un that I want as part of my memorial, my library and museum, which, by the way, the National Archives handles, not a former president. But he might be squirreling away things that he thinks exonerate him or dirty up people or institutions in our government, particularly when it comes to any allegations of his wrongdoing. So if he's got exonerating material at a secret level, maybe an intercept of somebody somewhere in the world saying something good about him or denying that something ever happened, he's going to save it. But we're getting glimpses, Ari, through media reporting of what the practices were like in the Trump White House. And what we're hearing is that often at a briefing, he would get this classified photo or he'd get a briefing paper and he'd say, can I keep this? And they'd say, no. And then he'd put it in his pocket and bring it to the residence, right? So his story that's developing even today in this motion he filed is that you don't understand me. I took stuff to my residence. And moving day was real busy because, you know, I still think I'm the president, so I wasn't going to move out. And then here come these guys with boxes and all my crap got put in these boxes and you don't understand. Maybe we don't.
That's such an existential, esoteric question that I don't know that I would ever have enough time with you before your next discussion to go through that. So let me now move to a few questions in the time that we have remaining, because I want to make sure that we don't run out of time before we get to some broader topics that I think will be interesting to an audience coast to coast, whether it be in Canada or south of the border. One of the things you always hear about in the last 3 years is peaceful protest, and how peaceful it was after George Floyd. I'm being heavily facetious. Courthouses being bombed, police stations being barricaded, car dealerships being set on fire. And I know that on your network, and I don't criticize you for it, I think you have a dream job, they have bent over backwards to say those protests were largely peaceful, with air quotes, and the greatest threat in the world is white supremacy, a color you and I happen to be, by the way, which in this day and age is not, the easiest one. Here's the question for you. If the punditry on your side of the aisle, and again, I never get into what I believe for the purpose of this show unless it's my monologue. The punditry would have predicted after the raid at Mar-A-Lago, the deplorables would have gotten their guns, gotten their Second Amendment. I can't keep the Second Amendment, I think, would have gone violent, would have done another January 6th, would have done, but meanwhile, there's been crickets. And I think you have said that if he's charged, there may be violence or the concern about violence. Does it surprise you that the raid on Mar-A-Lago has led to little to no violence? Does that surprise you?
So here's where I've got to disagree with you.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah. So there's not little or no violence. So first of all, a man has died in a cornfield in the dirt in a remote area of Ohio because he decided it was time to walk into an FBI field office with an AR-15 slung around his shoulder and then fire a round from a nail gun trying to break the bulletproof glass in the reception room. Then he was chased down by state troopers and shot and killed. A group of people have shown up with assault-style weapons in front of FBI Phoenix, Arizona field office. A man was arrested last week out of Pittsburgh with plans to shoot and kill FBI agents, family members, what have you. There's a guy running for state senator in the state of Florida who's announced that if he wins, he will have a plan to permit the shooting on sight of federal agents. And this goes on and on and on across the country. The chatter in the most violent, extreme chat rooms that we monitor is talking about killing FBI agents' families, children, where do they live? The judge who signed off on the federal warrant for the search of Mar-A-Lago, his house of worship has had to take extreme security measures to include canceling services.
This is Bruce Reinhardt.
Yeah. So I take issue with that. With regard to organized violence, let's not forget we're approaching about 1,000 people who have been charged for their role in January 6th. The good news there is that those charges have had a chilling effect. You can actually see Proud Boys and Oath Keepers in their chat rooms saying, I don't want to go to jail for this. I don't really want to go to jail for this. So this is almost like international terrorism after 9/11, Ari. So, success stories, you behead the leadership, right? You take out the leaders, they keep popping up, you take them out.
Yeah.
But bad news, you decentralize. And now the edict goes out on the international terrorism side after 9/11. Hey, don't wait for orders from us. If you can take action, do it. So that lone actor thing becomes a real problem here.
All right. So let me ask you, and I like that you disagree. This goes right back, Frank, to the point where when I watch your segments or CNN segments or the people called experts, and again, the other one, the FOX one, it's, some people call it a 4-letter word in 3. It depends on what you digest. Nobody seems to disagree with each other. It's all the same talking, rule of law, this, that. So here's a question I'll push back on you now, and I invite you to disagree with me again. You're an intelligent man. I hate sycophantic discussions. You quite rightly, and I think I would point out the difference between field FBI agents who pound the pavement, who make 75 or 125 grand a year. I don't know the numbers. I'm being somewhat facetious. Versus the people at the top, the Christopher Wrays the Joe Bidens, the Kamala Harrises. There is a difference to me between the ordinary average FBI person who faces abuse because of this versus the people at the top of the food chain. But wasn't that side and your side, and I'm not saying this as a pejorative, who don't like that the FBI agents, the field agents, have to take abuse or threats, weren't they sort of okay with the abuse police officers were taking post-May 2020 when they were called pigs, when assaulting police officers became de rigueur, the flipping over of police cars? I didn't see that side. And again, you can push back on me, it won't hurt my feelings. I didn't see the MSNBC or even CNN, the most trusted name in news. I didn't see them saying to their base, you can protest Mr. Floyd all you want, but going after the ordinary average police officers who make $52,000 a year in Oklahoma and threatening their lives, I never saw that pushback. So is there a disconnect there depending on what side of the aisle you're on when it comes to Trump or Biden, when it comes to issues of the safety of ordinary average law enforcement, ladies and gentlemen?
There's no question that the coverage of the riots, sometimes violent, sometimes harmful to police officers, injurious to police officers, some including arson and destruction of property, the coverage differed widely depending on the network you watched. It was covered probably to the point of repeat clips on a loop on Fox News, right? To the exclusion of most other coverage. And then conversely, on other platforms, including the one that I'm on, I don't think it was covered enough. I'm a law enforcement guy, right? I carried a badge and a gun.
That's why I'm asking you. That's why I'm asking you this question.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I will point out some things. There have been people arrested, namely an infamous torching of a police precinct up north. Well, I say up north, to you, it's south, but that was not at all done by blacks or by Antifa, but rather by somebody affiliated with right-wing extremist groups. So yes, there was violence, there was not balanced coverage. Yes, I think that the caveat there is the lens through which it was looked at on the far left was that this may be justified rage. A man was murdered and by someone wearing the uniform of the state. We've watched that over and over again. And it's something that particularly the African-American community has said all along, this happens to us. And just because it happened on video, now you're upset with it, right? So I think there was a sense of, okay, we get the rage. It doesn't excuse looting. It doesn't excuse violence, but we understand the rage.
And I understand that. And that's a conversation that's longer, but your point is well, that there's always an explanation. My whole thing, particularly as a criminal defense lawyer, as somebody who lives in the courts day in, day out, is violence never begets violence. And it doesn't matter what side you're on. And I think you're making a fair point that, I mean, I don't think we're that far apart on it. I just thought.
But I want to make the distinction between that and the violence of January 6th.
Sure.
Which in no way, shape, or form, unless you are totally deluded, as they were.
Yes.
And you bought into a falsehood that the election was stolen, that it was rigged, if voting machines were played with, whatever your choice of.
Yeah, the Mike Lindell nonsense.
Yeah, you can't. So there's justified rage, not excused, but understood.
Fair enough.
Then there's a bunch of people who really got duped and decided it was time to take over and the course of an election. And we can't have that. We shouldn't have either one of those in an ideal society. But I think it's apples and oranges.
No, that's fair. And I mean, we have to conclude there because I'm out of time. But, that's always been a concern with the polarization and tribalization to me, is that there's sort of that little, it's wrong, but, and I always think to myself, you can't have a liberal democratic society. The word democracy is very important to your side. when we confuse speech with violence, and we call violence speech and speech violence. So I think you and I are closer on that than many people would think. I really want to thank you for your time. I could talk to you for an hour. I've got so many more questions. Frank Figliuzzi, the former assistant director of the FBI. He is the chief security, national security correspondent on NBC and MSNBC. I really want to thank Frank for his time tonight. A really interesting discussion that I think gives us time to breathe rather than a 4-minute hit. Frank will know exactly what I mean by that. And hopefully, Frank, we can have you back on soon.
Yeah, anytime, Ari, and thanks for being part of the civil discourse. We need a whole lot more of that and a lot less of people screaming at each other. So thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Yep,
if you're just listening to us live, the Bilal Vakani Hour coming up after the show, and if you're listening to me and Frank throughout the week on Sirius XM, we really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, and have a great night.